Okay.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nanette Stevenson, and I want to welcome you to Writing and Editing as a Soulful Practice. This session is part of Alaska Book Week, which is a statewide celebration of all things books. It's coordinated by the Alaska Center for the Book. Thank you both. For many authors, writing is a practice that grounds our center and helps us make sense of the world. Writing shapes the lens through which we see ourselves and others. Editing is likewise a practice that takes skill and intuition to fully fledge an author's ideas and find the story's truth. We are fortunate today to have authors Marcia Wakeland, you can raise your pen, Marybeth Holleman, Kaylene Johnson-Sullivan, along with Alaska editor George Bryson, with us to discuss how writing and editing can be a soulful practice and how each panelist's beliefs, faith, and practice inform their work. As I wrestled with how to define this topic of a soulful practice, one morning the image of catching fireflies as a child came to mind on the darkened lawn outside of our house. And I thought that's a perfect metaphor. Enigmatic, mysterious, small flashes in the dark. So I think today we're going to catch a few fireflies. It may be a very East Coast thing. So a little introduction of me. I am a book designer. I live in Anchorage, and I'm the former art director of children's books at G.P. Putnam Sons and Philomel Books in New York City. I currently specialize in Alaska books published by Ember Press. Kaylene is the publisher. I take a holistic approach to creating a book, aiming to seamlessly integrate story, illustrations, photos, text layout, and manufacturing while working closely with the authors, illustrators, editors, and publisher to support their vision. My favorite phrase is honor the process. I was born and raised in and around New York City, so when I'm asked, why did I move to Alaska, I often say, I wanted to get closer to nature and I overreacted. Well, I may be a fish out of water, and I carry my bear spray to the supermarket, but our panel all know the wilderness in a deep and intimate level, and they take bears in their stride. I showed up at Kaylene's talk the other day carrying a bear spray. So I'd like to a little brief intro on each one, and then we will go to our first question. So Marcia Wakeland is the author of The Long Walk Home, Confessions on the Camino, Ember Press 2022, about her 500-mile pilgrimage on the Camino de Santiago across Spain. She is the co-founder of Anchorage's Listening Post, the organization that holds sacred the stories of anyone who yearns to be heard. Trained listeners pair with storytellers who are largely the homeless population of Anchorage. Marcia is an essayist, a blogger, and has also published 2 children's books. And it was my distinct honor and pleasure to be the designer of this book for the text and the cover. And it was a real journey and a pleasure. Marybeth Holleman has just launched her beautiful book of poetry, Tender Gravity, Boreal Books, 2022. In this September. Her poetry reflects on how the natural world draws us even deeper into the connection with ourselves and ultimately with each other. She is also the author of nonfiction books, including The Heart of the Sound and Among Wolves. She holds a degree in environmental studies from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and an MFA in creative writing from the University of Alaska. And I have decided that her poem, In the Garden, will be hung on my desk, and I will look at it, and then I will get up and I will go to my greenhouse and my garden. So thank you for that beautiful poem and the permission to leave our desks. George Bryson is a journalist who worked for the Anchorage Daily News for 30 years as a reporter, a Washington correspondent, a magazine writer, and the editor of We Alaskans. He holds an MFA degree in creative writing and has taught courses in journalism and literary nonfiction at both UAA and UAF. He co-authored books on natural science and Alaska history and served as the longtime organizer for the University of Alaska Anchorage Daily News Creative Writing Contest. Since retiring from the newspaper, George has traveled extensively. He really has. By motorcycle, bike, boat, and foot. He and his wife, Anne, have 3 grown daughters. And I can attest to his teaching skills because I took one of his classes many, many years ago, and it was absolutely wonderful. Kaylene Johnson-Sullivan, a biographer, an award-winning essayist, poet, and the author of memoir, A Tender Distance, Adventures Raising My Sons in Alaska. The memoir explores the interface between parenting, faith, and the powerful influence of Alaska's landscape throughout her sons' childhoods. Kaylene holds an MFA in writing from Spalding University. She is the publisher of Ember Press and a former director of the Kenai Mountain Turnagain Arm National Heritage Area. She is eminently patient. She has produced a list of really beautiful Alaskan books, and it's always been a wonderful pleasure to work with her. So here we are at our first question, and I think we will start with briefly, how would you define soulful or spiritual? We went back and forth on the title a little bit. Should it be spiritual or soulful? Maybe there's no difference. Traditional spirituality or something different that would inform your work? Do you have, you might touch on what your soulful writing practice is, what rituals you might use to get into it, yoga, meditation, playing the piano, rowing, canoeing, anything of that sort. So Marcia, would you like to lead off and give us your thoughts? A couple of minutes, and then we'll go around from there.
Yeah. Yes, like you, I was trying to decide how to define writing as a soulful practice and what my soulful practice was. It's interesting. It finally came to me in a quiet moment that my practice is noticing. I realized that most of my writing stems from the fact that what I notice in my exterior experience, and the slower the better, and the smaller usually the better, the more that affects my inner experience. And when those two wed, when I notice what my exterior experience hits me, that's when I feel that spark. Like, I want to write about that. You know, whether it's just the way somebody walks down a street, or 2 children having a conversation, or the other day I looked at how the sun was hitting a ring of mushrooms outside my window. And there was that wedding of the two, the outside and the inside, where I want to write about that. And I guess the other thing I noticed about that was that it seems like it's not only authentic and unique in soulful writing, but it's also, I think it always has a degree of vulnerability. And I think I always have this deep desire to write the thing as true as I can. So that's, I'd like to hear from others. Yeah.
Marybeth?
That was lovely, Marcia. Yeah, so soulful writing practice. Well, I mean, I think one of the beauties of being a writer is that we do pay attention. Like, that's our number one skill, probably, is that we really focus on paying attention. And to me, that's one of the joys of being a writer too, because it has taught me to pay attention more. And I really appreciate that. And I think that makes every moment of my life more soulful, whether I'm writing or doing the dishes. So in terms of spiritual traditions, I want to speak a little bit about that, because I was raised a Catholic, and I've studied Buddhism and Hinduism and Sufism, a lot of different religions. I've always been kind of curious about them. And looking through my poems in this collection, I see a lot of the influences of all these traditions in there. For example, there's a poem called Prodigal, because as a child going, to Catholic school and everything, I was always kind of stumped by the story of the prodigal son in the Bible. Like I didn't quite get why that was the way it was. So anyhow, there's a poem. And then there's some phrases and rhythms that come out of prayers and songs like World Without End. And I see that resonating in there. I also see Indra's net makes an appearance. A lot of Buddhist traditions about being in the moment and the importance of breath are woven into these poems. So I think, it's interesting to think about the effect of traditional spirituality on my work. And at the same time, I don't think about traditional spirituality being the guiding force here for me, but rather it's just something that I just feel when I'm, what they say in Joe versus the Volcano, that movie, away from the things of man. When I'm away from the things of man and I'm, adrift in the greater world of non-humans, the more than human. It's those moments when the veil drops and I feel the oneness of all that is. It's Virginia Woolf called it moments of being, and Mary Austin, the writer, called it flashes of mutual awareness, which I love that phrase because it implies mutuality. It implies reciprocity. So that's where I find my work rising from. I won't go too much into my process because I've probably already shot my 2 minutes. So I might weave some of that in later.
Yes, that would be perfect. Thank you. That's beautiful. George, would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Yes. Well, I'm a bit of the odd person out in this panel, in as much as I was introduced as an editor. I will say I've spent more time at the Daily News as a reporter and writer than I did the 12 years I was editor of We Alaskans. But the odd person out because, as we all know as writers, editors have no soul. And they're the ones who tell us to take lovely patches of our writing out of the story they say to make it cohere better and things like that. They tell us to kill our darlings. And but seriously, as a writer, I approach that question as a secular humanist. What moves me is humankind. And I also think of myself as a naturalist. I think a lot like everyone on this panel, I think of them all as naturalists. I'm moved by the beauty of nature. I'm fascinated by the science of nature. And these things touch my soul in as much as an editor can have a soul. The other thing I'd say is in writing, what is spiritual for me, what is soulful for me, is empathy for the other. Even in first-person essay writing, I don't think it's about you. I don't think it's about the writer. I think it's about what's out there, what they're observing, or the person they're observing. And so I just think empathy, empathy, empathy. Not apathy, where you look at a page and you decide, I don't want to read that, or sympathy, where something terrible has happened and you say, oh, that's too bad. But empathy, where it touches your heart and you care about the characters in the story and you want to know what happens next. So I'll leave it at that for right now.
Thank you. we will think, yes, you are both a writer and editor, and you can approach from either side or both. Kaylene.
Oh, it's great answers. It's been so interesting. Well, I come from a Christian tradition. I grew up in the church, or many Christian churches, as it turns out, because my parents couldn't agree on which one best suited them. So we skipped around quite a bit, and but I don't think that's a bad thing. And I think about the difference between tradition and spirituality. But as a philosopher, poet, and theologian John O'Donohue said, tradition is to culture what memory is to an individual, which I thought was really interesting. And when we lose our memory, we lose our way. Likewise, when we lose our cultural or faith traditions, for better or worse, we lose a well of wisdom from the generations that went before us. But all of that said, spirituality is a different thing from tradition. And it's, to me, the personal expression of what centers us, what grounds us, what helps us feel whole in the world. And it often feels, at least, like something outside of ourselves connecting to something within ourselves. As the psalmist says, deep calls to deep. So it's from this well that that I write in terms of my memoir. I wrote about how becoming a parent, utterly changed my ideas about God as the author of love. And as a parent, I just saw my own heart expand with such power that I came to this entirely new understanding of what that meant to be what it meant to love. So I'm get off track, but so at the same time I was raising my sons in the embrace of Alaska's landscape, that itself was an expression of a power far greater than my own concepts of time and space. Alaska's landscape shaped us, it challenged us, it grew us, all in profound but really separate ways. And that memoir is an exploration of that. Basically how the boys grew into young men with encounters of landscape that were very different from my own. And it was also a book about saying goodbye. I wrote the book as they were leaving for college. It was not saying goodbye to the boys that would grow into men, but also to a faith that would eventually transform into something new. So
that's lovely. It's amazing to see the threads all weaving together, all of you, of how you communicate with nature, with yourself, with others. And it's very inspiring. So Marcia, why don't we start with you? The Long Walk Home. You've just written this memoir on walking a very long pilgrimage. It took you 34 days, yes? And it was a very soulful journey as well. And I was wondering if you can make any correlations now between that and perhaps writing as a soulful pilgrimage. If you'd like to sort of start and go in from there and share it in a way that you can.
Thanks. Yeah, at first I thought, oh, I don't know, writing and pilgrimage. And then I think 4 or 5 different ways actually emerged from that reflection. And I think, first of all, that going on a pilgrimage is really born of a certain restlessness or a certain longing. And then when the person hears about pilgrimage, all of a sudden they know, that's it. That's what I need to do to calm this restlessness inside. There's and I feel like, and actually there was 3 or 4 people at a book talk this past weekend that I did who came up afterwards that were going to walk the Camino. And they had the very same experience, that they just knew they were supposed to walk it, but they weren't exactly sure why. And I think when I think about my writing, if I'm not writing the thing I'm supposed to write, I have this restlessness that won't let go. You know, things just don't feel right. If I feel like I'm not complete, that something isn't, it isn't clear, but I have to write. And in that way, that I feel the same kind of restlessness in both those experiences. And then another way that I felt, perhaps you can make a correlation, was that In a pilgrimage, of course, even though you have an endpoint and there is a path, of course, you can still get lost, as I did, and you can, but you really don't know what's around the next corner. And on my Camino, I did get lost. So I think that that by nature, a pilgrimage is full of obstacles and challenges, and that is actually what causes the transformation. And so I thought about that with writing, you know, how often we complain about writer's block, but there's so many other challenges of just deciding what words you can use to describe this experience, and what genre should I use, and how do I organize it, and how am I going to introduce this character? And certainly what to leave in and what to leave out. And I will just say to George, thank goodness for Soulful editors, because you were certainly one to me. And just that struggle. And I never thought about it in this way, but I really think that maybe that struggle of writing, I mean, if writing was easy, what would that mean? But this process we go through of, and giving it so much heart, you know, to make it this true thing, that I think it also is what makes writing potentially transformative as well. And I think, like a pilgrim, there's just a lot of surprises along the way. And things don't exactly turn out the way you thought. On my pilgrimage, there was a storm of the century. I walked into it without knowing it because I didn't have any connection to news. And it was just a deluge of rain and thunderstorms and lightning. At one point, the lightning hit right in front of my husband and I. And when I looked up and tried to find him, he wasn't there. I thought he'd been killed by lightning. I had missed the post and I was 2 miles off the trail. But again, you know, in that process, in that challenge, and if those difficulties, for me, I had this soulful experience of suddenly learning about true surrender to the moment and what was there. And I think there can be sort of that surrender with the writing too. I mean, at least sometimes when you're writing and you're writing down the words, and then it goes to places that you weren't expecting. And sometimes I write down words I didn't even know, but I feel like I wrote sometimes. You know, it just feels like it was written. And in those times, I also feel like that was some of my experiences on the pilgrimage. Things just unfolded, and I learned things about myself that I didn't know before, just as I do when I write. And so those were some of the reasons that I feel maybe I can make some correlations between pilgrimage and writing, which is kind of interesting. And the only other thing I wanted to add was I had started talking about noticing and how important it was and to my my soulful practice. So I just thought I'd read a little bit, just a minute or so from my book. And this is after the pilgrimage is over and I'm leaving the Santiago Cathedral, and what I notice as I leave, and then how it does impact my soulful writing practice. I walked out with regrets, thinking of all the ways I would do it differently next time. Then I nearly stumbled upon a Muslim woman begging at the door of the cathedral, her burqa dirty and worn, holding out her brown hand for a few coins. I was propelled past her into the momentum of the crowd, but for a brief moment, I looked into her eyes and she in mine. We are all beggars. These were the words found on a scrap of paper in the pocket of Martin Luther, the founder of my first faith tradition, just after he died. I didn't remember those words at the moment I looked into the eyes of that beggar woman. I was too numb that day. But now I see her and the German woman who hugged me, the Japanese woman who fell and hurt her knee by the fountain, the South African woman who drank scotch and tried to stand on her head, Juana, who took us in during the storm, the British woman grieving her husband, the priest at San Juan who nurtured us with garlic soup and kind words. Each person I met now flashed into my consciousness, each face and expression, each act of kindness and indifference, each conversation both passionate and cynical, And each memory of the trees, of the frogs, of the birds, and the richly tilled earth all reminded me that in the end, as we walk out of the door, we are one tribe. We are all begging, each person, each part of the creation, to become one again with the source. We tread our ways upon this earth, each in our own unique camino, back to that source, yearning to become real again, our souls begging to shed our skins of fear and pride, to lift the lid that has taken captive our light, to open our hearts to love where love is undeserved, and to create sanctuaries on this earth where all are welcomed, just as we beg to belong.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If we have a little time afterwards, I'd be interested to hear a little bit more about how you evolved with the confession part, because that's sort of a bookend to your writing with the confessions.
Yes.
But that was lovely.
Mm-hmm.
Marybeth, let's turn to you, just so we'll move along and have everybody, and I don't want to cut anyone short. In writing about the natural world, what is your approach and process? This is both how do you do it and why do you do it? When we spoke, you mentioned of getting out of the way of letting nature speak. And if you'd like to share a poem with us, we'd be honored.
Yeah, thanks. I'd be glad to. In fact, if I could just read poetry the whole time, that would be easier. First, George, yes, it's not about me, thank God. I mean, it's it's something that, in terms of writing, has helped me so much to remember that I'm never writing about me, ever. It's never about me. And even though I write a lot of personal essays and there's I in there, but I write to repair our relationship with the non-human world. I mean, that's just the simple thing to help us connect, or really reconnect, because we all have that connection, and it's frayed by society, things that happen to us becoming adults. And I write to reveal, and this is not only in my poems in Tender Gravity, but also in my memoir, The Heart of the Sound. I write to reveal how a relationship with a mountain, a bear, a birch tree, a nuthatch can be just as vital and strong and nourishing and necessary as a relationship with another human being. And I also write to give voice to the world beyond humans. And give voice isn't the right phrase, because they have voice. It's more to reveal their voice. And so that's where I'm getting myself out of the way. I mean, especially there, because I've had this conversation with other writers who try to write, say, a persona poem about a wolf, for example. Like, how do you do that? You don't really know a wolf completely, no matter how much time you might spend with them. So that's a very spiritual, if you will, process for me, and that's why it's so vital to me to spend so much time alone in the wild. And sometimes it's grand wilderness adventures, but mostly it's just walking my dogs by myself on familiar trails. And so just it brings me great joy when I have these moments of feeling that veil drop and feeling some oneness and feeling like there's some wisdom that comes through me, and if I'm lucky, down onto the page. So it involves a lot of deep listening. And I feel that there's a lot of harm that has come from teachings that have created and devised a hierarchy at which we're at the top, instead of humans in proper scale. I myself feel much happier when I'm in proper scale with the rest of the living world. And this sense of being separate from, the Sierra Club's Friends of the Earth, their motto, not man apart, or not people apart, let's say that, that we're not apart from the rest of the world. We are, in fact, a part of it, a very integral part, and we have a place in it. but we are not, it's not dominion over. And so, you know, I think we're seeing now some of the ways that we are inescapably all interconnected, and that all is one. And I think of this this quote by the poet Audre Lorde, who was speaking about human oppression, but it applies, and that is that there is no hierarchy of oppressions. And by that she meant, you know, as long as one is oppressed, we're all oppressed. You know, there's no freedom there unless we're all free. So so that's some of my philosophy and my why I write. And in terms of process, again, you know, it's just a lot of solo time. And then I've taken to, I meditate every morning. And so I've taken to stopping on the trails. I've trained my dogs to sit and wait while I do this. And I meditate for a few moments, you know, by the side of the trail. I just find a quiet spot. I sit on a rock or a log or whatever. And then I open my eyes, usually just for a couple minutes, not long. And then I open my eyes, and it's really a beautiful experience, because it really, you can calm the mind, and then you're much more present in the moment, in the place, and you see things, you see what's actually in front of you so clearly. So that's become an important part of my process for me. And then in terms of the writing itself, I think I told Nanette this, I have a very increasingly complicated morning ritual. So I wake up, I meditate, and then I do morning pages, which I got from The Artist's Way eons ago, where you just write 3 pages longhand. And then I read some poetry, and then I write a poem. And William Stafford, the poet from Washington, he wrote a poem first thing every morning. And that's where I got that practice from, was him doing it. And so before I ever tried thinking that I might send a poem out to get published anywhere, I was just writing one every day as kind of writing practice. Because it's good practice. It's like you get rhythms of words, the way they rub up against each other, the way you get the conciseness of an image. It's very powerful that way. So let me read a poem. And Nanette, I'm glad you liked the garden poem, but I'm going to read one that's called Out. And this one, I feel, brings together a lot of things for me. I mean, it brings together experiences in the non-human world. It brings together, you know, as George pointed out, how interesting it is to look at what science finds out about the natural world. It looks at indigenous ways of knowledge. It's all kind of folded in here. And I've gotten much more interested in the past few years about plants and all we're learning from them. And I meditate. And the teacher that I refer to here is Pema Chodron, the Tibetan Buddhist nun, but it could just as well be the birch tree outside my window. Out. The tops of the spruce seem to move, though there isn't a breath of wind, and they don't sway as one, but instead each needle, it shimmers as if. In Central America, people are using nothing but sight to record the respiring breath of each plant, from leaf to rainforest air. To see a plant exhale. My teacher says all violence would subside, if not disappear, if each of us, everywhere, just paid attention to our breath, in and out. It's so easy, we don't even have to think about breathing, but when I listen and wait for call and response, I learn there's just so much A scientist claims that the breath of plants can save us from warming climates and acid seas if only we'd regreen our world. To relax, exhale twice as long. Once I sat on a rock that had recently been under ice, shaped now by the softest green so gently, it felt like a breath. Thanks.
You.
Thank you.
Your use of color. I sometimes think that maybe the poets were ahead of the scientists in knowing what was going on out there. Now we're learning more and more of how the structure of our brain and the roots and trees communicating. But I think the poets and the writers knew that. Thank you. George, writer, editor. As an art director, I know the scorn that can be heaped upon you when you say, would you like to take that out? And they look at you like, no. In addition to writing, you have edited many writers. I wrote successful, but effective, I think might be a better choice of word. Editor, it takes skills and intuition to fully fledge an author's ideas and to find the story's truth. When we spoke, you talked about starting the start of a story, and you said that you looked at it and what is the story, and why should you read it? And I think that would be true. I think we've heard threads of that now from each of you. But as someone who tells stories and lives stories, would you like to expand on that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, I often put that question to myself, not just to people who I'm working with in a partnership as an editor. I put the question to myself, you know, I'm a careful reader, I'm a slow reader, and so I don't want to waste my time on something that's I don't need to read or want to read. And so I always ask the question to myself, you know, why should someone else bother to read this? And I'll answer that question in just a second, but I just wanted to play off something Marybeth just said about, you know, what she gets from just taking a walk with her dog in the Chugach. I feel the very same thing. Just before COVID hit in the spring of 2020, the previous November, myself and 4 friends, we decided we'd do a winter descent of the Grand Canyon. And a lot of people have seen the Grand Canyon in summertime, of course, when it's very hot, but we got there just as the snow was starting to fall on the Grand Canyon, which just made it absolutely beautiful. But as you descend, and in the first few feet, you pass the geologic history of humankind, and you continue down, and until you get to the Colorado River, you have passed 1 billion years of geologic history. And if you let your imagination go with it, you know, well, here is the first fish in the Devonian age, and here, you know, is the first multicellular organism. And it's just science can be overwhelming in really a spiritual way like that. So thanks for kind of bringing those things up, Marybeth. You know, why should we bother to read anything that we've written? I think the answer is, well, because it's important and interesting. And if what we're writing, you know, is just a little bit important or not that important, then it really needs to be interesting. And that gets into writing well, which is hard, you know, apart from the title of this panel, it can be soul crushing, right? I saw this quote by Donald Barthelme, who said, endings are elusive, middles are nowhere to be found, but worst of all is to begin, to begin, to begin. And we've all felt that. A few years ago, well, a lot of years ago, I was attending a nonfiction writers conference in Boston, and the New Yorker staff writer, Susan Orlean, gave really a great panel discussion on beautiful writing, she called it. She had a high opinion of her own writing. She called it beautiful writing. But she said a couple of things that have really stuck with me. And she didn't, as far as starting a story, she said she doesn't believe there's such a thing as writer's block, that if you're having difficulty starting a story, it's because there's three things to the process. There's reporting, there's thinking, and there's writing. And if you're sat down to write and you're having trouble, it's because you haven't thought it out enough beforehand. And if you can't figure it out beforehand, maybe that's because you have nothing in your journal or your notebook or your reporter's notebook. And so the very first step is to have something to say, something really worth hearing to say. And I don't know, I think we've, as a lot of journalists at the Daily News can recall, there's times when you just came back into the newsroom and you were so excited because you'd tell, I've got a great story here. It just had a wonderful interview, great quotes, interesting problem, fascinating statistics, etc. And so you've got good stuff, but then you have to think about it. And, how is it going to cohere? Where's the best beginning? And we Alaskans, a lot of times, we had an opportunity to have long form nonfiction, in which case you could maybe start a story in medias res, which is a literary term for starting in the middle of the chronology with a scene that engages the reader's interest. It's like they're watching a movie all of a sudden, and there's characters in that movie, and something is happening, and something is happening next. And it leads to the crux of the problem of the entire piece you're writing. And then you leave it, and you go to the chronological beginning of everything you have to say, which is the backstory, how you got there, how those characters got there, or how you got there. And you move chronologically through it. And so you've captured the reader's interest, hopefully. And then you take them on this journey that they really want to go on, until you pass back through that scene to the conclusion of the story. And that's just one way. That's just one way of devising the story, but you have to come up with some way. What's the best beginning? I recently was trying to recapture stories I'd written in my career, because my wife and I, we had a house fire last November, and our house was destroyed, and along with it, everything I ever wrote, and all my books, and all my pictures, and all my journals. And so it's something where it's kind of like a blank slate, and I'm trying to recapture these things. And I just pulled this story off the Daily News database, and it's the very first year of We Alaskans was 1980, and I had been a reporter there at the paper for 2 years, and I got hired to be the staff writer of We Alaskans in 1980, and I got assigned to do a story to go out to Western Alaska for something I just had never heard of. It's the harvesting of eels on the Yukon River. It happens in early winter, and it was surreal. It was absolutely surreal. And here's just the start of that story. Where are the eels? No one knows. So the men of Grayling shuffle their feet on the ice of the Yukon and continue to wait. They stand with their backs turned to the wind. They check their dip nets. They look down at the large eeling holes they've already cut through ice 6 inches thick, and they wait. Somewhere downriver, the men say, somewhere moving silently under the ice is a great school of eels swimming toward Grayling. Thousands of eels moving as one. So many eels, their arrival will force the water out of the eeling holes as they pass by. Last year, this is a quote, last year the eels were so thick you could hardly get your net back in the water, one man says. With each scoop, the net was at least half full. They will arrive soon, the men tell each other. They will arrive just as sure as the eels have always arrived on the lower Yukon in November, as far back and long ago as Athabascan time. That was just the beginning, but that's an example of a scene trying to draw the reader in, and to the point where they wonder, what happened next? What happened next? I'll leave it at that.
We're going to have to reconvene this group and have a walk together and find out about the eels, among other things. And I have noted down an eeling hole because I think that's we have a metaphor there, these eels. But let's get to Kaylene to make sure we get through this round. And Marybeth, I know you have a little bit of a time crunch there. So Kaylene, in your book, A Tender Distance, Adventures, and they were adventures, weren't they? Raising My Sons in Alaska. You write about faith, parenting, and the influence that Alaska's landscape had in shaping who you and your boys would become. In the years since the book was written and published, have your ideas about faith, parenting, and landscape changed? And if so, how? Because there's quite a distance, there's quite a time span from when you started, I think, making notes or actually writing the book, and when it was published, and now.
Well, thanks. I'm just loving what everyone has said, and the words that are coming to mind are pilgrimage, reciprocity, presence, and why bother? It's just all wonderful, just so wonderful. So yeah, it was a lot to think about, from when I wrote the book. At the time I wrote it, it was just this upwelling of need to express this enormous change that was about to unfold as my boys left home. And so in many ways, writing for me has been a way to explore the edges of what is going on in life. And so what has changed about faith and parenting and landscape, I think, while I embraced a certain tradition for a long time, I found it a beautiful vessel that could hold and uphold spiritual formation. I think over time, I've really discovered that we're held by something even bigger than tradition, than the tradition that nurtured us in our early journeys. And while that revelation can be a little unsettling maybe to some, it can also be really transformative as we explore this new frontier of what it means to be human, what it means to live in the world, and to be part of the world and part of the natural world. And I think that's, while my, appreciation has really deepened in some ways for tradition, it's also been a launching pad for thinking outside of the boxes of tradition. And I think about the message, the Christian message is that, if nothing, Jesus was a subversive and utterly redefining tradition all along and what it meant to love. But what really hasn't changed probably is my reverence for wilderness and its transformative power. And I just feel that that's become so important, even in the 20 years since I wrote the book. I think it's almost 20 years. It has been 20 years actually since I wrote it, and then it was published later. And I just feel like that word reciprocity is just so key right now to what we need to be thinking about, because the earth has nurtured us all of this time. It's time for us to reciprocate and protect and care for what gives us life. And I thought maybe, so I guess, you know, there's been a lot of change, you know, but I thought I might read this little segment out of the memoir. The preface is, it's the end of a chapter where my boys, who are now teenagers, are going hunting, and they're going bear hunting with their dad. And it's really bothering me. I'm having a really hard time with this concept, especially given what I felt I had taught them as they grew up in their years in the wilderness, in the Alaska landscape. So I went for a lot of walks while they were getting ready, because I just couldn't be there, you know, as they're packing their guns and ammo and gear. So one of the walks, I came across a bear. So then, like a ghost, he appeared. On the other side of the dam, the brown bear ambled into the middle of the stream and sat down in the water facing me. I don't think he saw me, but if he did, he was unconcerned. He dunked his head and then looked up. Water trickled off his ears and snout. He was sunny brown, an adolescent bear, maybe 2 years old, around 400 pounds. Still sitting, he lifted his front paws out of the water, and then comically he allowed himself to fall over backwards. He rolled over, got up on all fours, and then sat down again and watched the salmon. He didn't appear hungry or intent on anything in particular. He was lean and lanky and gorgeous and just a little bit goofy looking. Then, as quickly as he appeared, he wandered off, his motions fluid and effortless and quiet. Had I not been anchored by the weight of my own body, I might have flown with euphoria, lifted up and out of my skin into the cool evening sky by consuming joy. What a wonder, this bear, undisturbed, playing almost human-like with relaxed abandon. I stayed another hour, hoping he might return. Twice more I saw him cross the stream, each time a little farther away. Seeing the bear again proved he was real and not some wisp of wishful thinking. Then somehow I knew the bear was gone for good, and it was time to go home. At the dark end of dusk, the crunch of my footsteps on the trail made real my presence here, a place as tangible and mysterious as the spaces of family and motherhood and the conflicted human world in which I lived. Yet for this moment, the taste of crisp night air eclipsed all else except the rising moon to the north. So thank you.
Yeah, that's lovely. Would we like to exchange some questions between you? The final question was going to be to look forward and what you're working on or something, but we've said such powerful and wonderful exchanges. Does anyone have a question for someone else? And either in how they did something or what they were saying, probably most likely.
Well, I just want to say, Kaylene, that I love that passage you read, and I remember the first time I read it. It's really gorgeous, so thank you for sharing that with us. What a moment.
Thank you.
It's interesting, as I think you all have had so many more experiences with bears on trails. And as I listen to you and try to kind of, and I live right on the edge of it, they're in and out all the time. And it was this summer that I had my first encounter, and it was a very hot day. And I was out sort of with my neighbor's dog who I walk with, and there was this bear, and it just kind of looked over its shoulder at us. And I had anticipated this moment for so long. And actually, it was quite different than what I expected. You know, I think we were sort of on the same plane. And I think, Kaylene, you're writing about that. It's very comforting because it seems like we can share the same space. maybe not in my greenhouse, but even then, I think, it's.
Well, Nanette, I remember coming to your house one time and you pointing out the paw prints on your
Oh, my door. Yeah.
thing, your door, which was she had to change the handles to the doors so they weren't
Didn't let
that you could
themselves
push
in.
down and let themselves into the house. But you
And
have
I
quite a
think
parade of bears at your.
We were with Marcia's mom, and we were out on the deck, and we were looking at the garden, and I was saying, "Oh, look at that!" And I looked to my left, and in comes. I went, "Oh, I think we might want to back up a little bit." Wasn't that with your mom, Marcia?
Yes.
That the bear
Yeah.
appeared. So it was George.
Yeah, I'll just say to Marcia that I'm enjoying reading your book about the Camino. As you know, and thank you for sending it to me. I happened to walk the Camino actually in my 60s, whereas I think you walked it in your 50s. And so as I'm reading it, I'm thinking, well, as we know, everyone walks their own Camino, and no two are the same. But as I'm reading yours, I'm reading really slow because I'm suddenly going off on this discursive trip of what I was doing at the same point. But what I will say is, I think you started the whole book very well in that you tell the reader that you've been an ordained minister and that you have resigned that position, and you're going on a long walk to think about your life and your faith. And so obviously, what happens next? What happens next? And so that's very engaging, and I'm enjoying it so far. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd love to hear about your walk, of course. And I was happy to hear you have been able to salvage some of your own writing. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that with us. Yeah. I'm touched by the soulfulness of all of our pieces. Yeah. Maybe we can't exactly define it, but we all know it.
It's true, isn't it? And share it. And it's nice, I think, a gathering like this, and maybe in person at some point. George, you talked when we just talked on the phone about, being in together with people, that one of the things that drives you and connects you in story is your book group and being with people and connecting. And while this is still through Zoom, I think it is very powerful that the four of you to come together and share your experiences and that moment, those fireflies in your writing. And my last question, and I'll go quickly to Marybeth. In looking forward, do you have a new project, more poems, or are you now on your rock and thinking and letting it come to you?
Well, I'm always writing. I mean, I'm writing a poem every day, but I don't know what will come next. I have a novel that's making the rounds right now. I kind of like, as a writer, to try all the forms that are available to me. So I tried my hand at fiction too. But I'm like I said earlier, I'm just delving deeper into the plant world, and I'm just fascinated by some of what we're learning. And one little thing that well, it's a big thing. The largest plant in the world. These researchers were studying eelgrass off the coast of Australia, and we have eelgrass in our marine waters too, in South Central Alaska, and they're really important they're a better carbon sink even than tropical rainforests. So they're really important, and people are studying them and trying to restore them. And in Australia, they were taking, it's 70 square miles is the area of it. And they were taking pieces of it from different areas, trying to figure out different DNA sequences for each of them. And they found out it's all one plant. So I've just been like, whoa, I've been trying to, think about that. And I mean, maybe there'll be a poem or an essay that comes out of that. But there's just so much we don't know, and it excites me more than I can say, the mystery of it, and I just want to every day just keep falling into the mystery.
Oh,
Leave it at that.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. That's wonderful. Kaylene, I know you are working on a novel now, which is a little different than the nonfiction and other books that you've done. Would you like to share a little bit of the challenges? I know you were in Europe and you did research.
Yeah, it's definitely a departure, and it's been kind of a long-term project. But I have two grandfathers who fought in World War II, and they fought on opposite sides of the war. One was a German soldier, and the other was an American soldier, and they both were at Normandy. And I just found that really fascinating, because then their children and grandchildren, became, my father went, anyway, we wound up, having this history, but nobody talked about it ever. So I've fictionalized the story about my German grandfather, because I'm kind of exploring, how did people get to places where, like we are in some ways, or have been, even politically? How do you get there, as a culture? And it's not only an exploration of that, but it's sort of a question that intrigues me. But it's a historical fiction, and from a point of view that maybe isn't all that common. So,
have you found that it's been evolving as you've been? Because I've known a little bit about it. As you've tried to get into it, and your approach, and who is.
Yeah, it's been one of the hardest things I've ever written. I think partly because, like maybe George said, you have to kind of know what it's about and think about it before you start writing. And I think that piece has evolved so much because I've had so many of my own questions as to how to even approach the story. So I've written and rewritten it a number of times, just trying to figure out, what is it about? And I think the premise is interesting, but what is this arc of the story going to be? And so I've written it a couple times now, really. But yeah, still working on it, and that's where I'm
Very
at.
hard.
And then I do write a fair amount of poetry, just as a way of marking the seasons and marking what's happening around me in my environment. I love this little area that's in my world. It's I call it the holler. It's just this little wild space that it's just beautiful to watch the seasons change in, and oftentimes the poetry is about that. But yeah, so that's sort of the ongoing thing, and then there's the bigger project always in the wings.
And you've also, I know during the pandemic, you write letters occasionally. That's a form.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
Which I thought was quite interesting, because as we came through the pandemic and we were working on books together, you would tell me, and I thought it was an interesting form to use.
Oh yeah, thank you. I wrote another book-length work that is strictly letters to my 1-year-old granddaughter, who I was not able to see during that first year of the pandemic. And I missed her terribly, and I wanted very much to be able to reflect with her what was happening in the world in real time. And I thought it would be interesting to go back, even as a time capsule, day by day, even, and say what was happening, because so much happened that year, 2020. And so I wrote from the 1st of April, 2020 to the 1st of April, 2021. And I haven't done anything with it. It's just in manuscript form right now, but I'm glad I wrote it, and I'm glad I took the time to do it.
In some ways, that segues right back into Marcia, because, you were told to put your manuscript in the drawer of Barry Lopez and let it marinate. And it did. It was edited. You made some quite substantial changes to it in the end.
Yes, I did. Probably half of it I, let go. And then, I needed, as George was saying, I needed a lot more time to think about it. I had all of the facts. I had reported everything down pretty in detail, but I had to think about it. What was it? Really, what was that? So I really appreciate his advice for me to put it in a drawer and wait. Yeah.
And I know you have your 34 blog that you're continuing your writing,
right,
as little mini caminos that can be found on your blog. which are wonderful and insightful and tolerant of slideshows that don't work and patient.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
And George, you're off on an adventure. Are you writing when, I know you're reconstructing a bit. Are you also, do you journal or?
Yeah. Well, right. There's the fire. That's something. But I just realized a while back this year that it's been 50 years since I made my first trip to Alaska. I left my hometown of Long Beach on a motorcycle, well, on a motorbike, and it didn't get very far. And then I got on a train and it got to Seattle, and then I got on a ferry, and then I hitchhiked from Haines. And I thought 50 years, why don't I do that backwards? And my thought was, because this was after our fire, was that this would give me space to write on the train, and try and recall a lot of the things that I've lost in terms of stories and experiences and journals. So I did that, and I got a USA Rail Pass, and yes, I shared some of my photos and some of my writing on Facebook, and I'm going to. I was planning. I'm going to New Orleans very soon, and I was planning on continuing the train trip. But as you may have read, there's a looming railroad strike across the nation. And so a lot of those long trip trains are on the brink of being discontinued. So I guess I'm hoping that doesn't happen, but it's sounding like it will. But yes, I'm trying to recapture things that were part of my life, and that could, we'll see where that goes. Yeah.
Good.
Well, that's exciting. Now I'm really convinced that we have to all meet up for a walk. I will organize it.
Okay.
Does anyone have anything else they'd like to add before we say goodbye? I think we're just about at time, but.
Well, thank you, Nanette, for moderating and for your thoughtful questions, and for putting it all together. So that was wonderful. Thank you.
Well, it's been wonderful for me. I've loved it. A little nervous, but it's been such a nice conversation, both individually with each of you, and then to see it come together. And I do feel like it's sort of, we want to kind of keep the conversation going, but for now. So thank you all for taking the time to think about things and share your work with us. And all of these wonderful books can be bought, and I'm sure the authors will sign them for you and even read a passage for you. So thank you, everyone, and stay well, and we will keep in touch.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Just see you well.